will get you there. Now, if you go to Amazon, I post this little description of the book. Theologians have long believed the vision of the goat and the ram in Daniel chapter 8 describes the rise of Alexander the Great and the defeat of the Persian Empire at his hands. What if it's about events that are happening now? And so here's what I'm going to ask you to do for the next hour. A lot of people have gone through studies where that was the case. Okay, they've looked at the ram and the goat as a description of the invasion by Alexander the Great against the Persian Empire. And what I'm going to ask you to do is take Alexander the Great, and imagine a little box here. We're going to take Alexander the Great, put him in the box, close up the box, and let's forget about Alexander for a little bit. I'll pull him out from time to time to make a few comparisons, but for the most part, I want to set him to this side. So think about Daniel chapter 8 as if it was written like 2 minutes ago, okay? Now, the first question you're going to have is, can we do this? Do we have permission to do this from the Scriptures? Am I doing something that is, sort of theologically wrong? Well, in Daniel chapter 8, verse 16 and 17, we see a conversation between Gabriel and God and Daniel. And God's talking to Gabriel, and as Alan was talking earlier, Gabriel is, this angel is very close to God, and God at times communicates through Gabriel. And he tells Gabriel, he says, make this man, Daniel, to understand the vision. And he said unto me, and now Gabriel's talking to Daniel, and he says to me, understand, O Son of Man, for a time of the end shall be the vision. Okay? So God is trying to make very clear in the Scriptures, because the word understand is mentioned twice, trying to get us to understand something that's very important. And what is the very important thing that he's trying to communicate? When this vision is going to take place. And it's going to take place at a time of the end, or possibly the end times, as we often describe it, of the time near the end, the time of the tribulation. And the argument that I would make is Alexander the Great was around, 2,000 years ago. And I don't think he meets the qualification here of the end times. So if this is accurate, and this is an accurate interpretation on my part, then let's look at it like that. Let's look at the book of Daniel with a fresh sort of eyes, and look at it as if it's happening in our times. Okay, so let's talk about the ram first. It says, behold, there stood a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high. But one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. So let's talk about how these horns work. I've got one horn that's high, one that's high, but not quite as high, but later it's going to be higher. Okay? So we got 2 prominent forces, 2 prominent countries that we're going to find out. And let's gather a little more information about the ram. Gabriel gives us an interpretation. In Daniel chapter 8, verse 20, he says, the ram which you saw, Daniel, are these 2 horns, the kings of Media and Persia. Now, in the modern day sense, who is Persia? That one's kind of easy, isn't it? If you buy a Persian rug, where do you get it from? Well, you'd buy it from Iran, wouldn't you? Who are the Medes? This is a tougher question. When I was writing this in 2009, there's a group of people, a nationality of people called the Kurds. And they were making claims that we are direct descendants of the Medes. And at the time, it was kind of controversial. Now, though, it's pretty well accepted. If you go out there on the internet and type in Kurds and Medes, you'll find a lot of prophecy experts that say, yep, we believe the Kurds are the descendants of the Medes. So we've got the two right parties then. Now, who are the Kurds? There's about 25 million of them. Iran has about 80 million people. The Kurds have no official borders, okay? However, they claim a place called Kurdistan, and so they reference it all the time. We are part of Kurdistan. And now, some other things to point out. They are people without any borders. Think of another people that don't have any borders. How about the Palestinians? Okay, nation, a people without any borders. There's only 7 million of them. So if you were going to argue for somebody to have a nation with borders, from a rational point of view, I would consider the Kurds before I consider the Palestinians. And the Kurd group they're actually a very large group to be a people without borders, because they have more people than some nations that do have a border. Take Syria, for example. Syria only has 19 million people. Okay, and like we said, Kurds, about 25 million. So they actually outnumber the Syrians. And this is a number before the Syrian civil war. So there are less people in Syria than there used to be. They live in, now the Kurds, they are spread out over 4 different countries: Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. And they're kind of persecuted wherever they live. In those nations, they have trouble naming their kids Kurdish names. They have trouble using the Kurdish language. They have to use the language of whatever country that they're in. And so, like I said, somewhat persecuted in whatever country that they're in there. Let me show you a map that I've constructed for you that looks kind of like a horse's head. In Syria, they are north and east of the Euphrates River. And then you come over to Iraq. They're in the northern part of the country of Iraq. In Iran, they're mostly along the Iran-Iraq border all the way until you get to Armenia up there. And if you see the town of Tbilisi at the very top of the point, that's Armenia. And then if you go down from there, you're in Turkey. And if you draw a line from that tip point in Armenia all the way again to the Euphrates River where it crosses Turkey, then they have a sort of slice of Turkey on the eastern side, and that's what they would like to carve out into a nation. Now, let's summarize the RAM a little bit. The RAM is Iran and the Kurds, so they obviously have a political alliance. Iran is the most powerful now. They will be the first horn. And if you think about the Alexander the Great interpretation, they believe the Medes were the first horn. Okay, so we're going to be completely backwards of that in looking at it in the present day. The Kurds will rise to be more powerful than Iran. They are the second horn. Now,